So we are going to get started with some of the questions that I gathered already from you inside of our wonderful private group on Facebook, as well as on our Instagram page. So if you're not part of the community on Instagram just yet, I invite you to join us there at Vaginismus Sisters. There's lots of nuggets of information, guidance, stories, and of course, shares from fellow Vaginismus sisters that I like to put on there. It's really a place that we can connect like no other. And I am so grateful that today we have these places and communities that I felt at least didn't exist back in the day, or at least I didn't find them. And over 10 years ago, when I was in the depths of going through this protective body response of vaginismus, I felt so alone. And I have to say, I wanted to forget that part of my life for so long that I didn't even allow myself to go back to those memories. And when I did, when one day I was actually on a road trip with my partner at the time, and I came across a blog post about a fellow Vaginismus sister going through this excruciating physical and emotional pain, all of those memories seemed to just flood back in. And that was the start of my commitment to share my story, the strategies, the practices, the techniques that had worked for me in my own sexual liberation journey as a bit of a guiding light, as much as I can possibly do, so that no one had to feel like I did back then, laying in my bed, bawling my eyes out, wondering why me? Like this question that just, I feel like each one of us asks at some point or another. And if you're watching now, or if you're watching the recording and would like to interact with us throughout, I'll definitely be going back to those comments. I'd love to know if you too felt this way. You had asked this why me question, maybe you still do today. It really does lead down some dark paths. But all of that doesn't have to be your reality anymore. And I like to say that healing happens in community, not isolation. And so that's exactly what you are already subscribing to. That's the intentional action you're taking to join us in community, so you no longer have to feel alone in this experience. And I want to mention a little piece here in case you too seem to be on this journey with it. I'm starting to break up from the word healing. It did serve me well for a very large stage of my life. And I feel like healing brings up ideas of nourishment and ideas of, I guess the concept of healing is about growth as well and nourishment. But there was also part of me at one point that took this on to mean I am broken and I need fixing, and therefore I need to heal myself or cure myself. Or I'm dysfunctional, as unfortunately in our society, we put vaginismus in this bucket of sexual dysfunction. So it's this idea of I'm dysfunctional and I need to heal and fix myself. And this is far from the empowering perspective that I invite you to take, that there is nothing about you that you need to fix. And perhaps some pieces still feel very relevant as healing components of this journey. And still, I've started to break up from this word and take on the idea that we are growing, we are releasing, we are processing emotionally rather than necessarily healing emotionally. And I think this shift in our mindset can be really helpful with seeing the steps that we can take going forward rather than focusing on the less than nourishing thought that we are broken and we need fixing. He says yes with a bunch of exclamation mark. I love that you are resonating with this. And I think there comes a time in this personal growth journey that we really need to continue looking forward and be learning from some of the trials and errors and quote unquote mistakes that we've made, but definitely not focusing on the more disempowering parts of the journey or how other people have explained the journey before, which is far from the truth of what it is. It truly is a sexual liberation journey. And there is so much there are so many amazing insights that have just come out of this that are broader than simply the concept of the protective body response of vaginismus, broader than the state of your pelvic floor muscles. It is an erotic liberation, and that's what I would love for you to consider that you're signing up for as part of this beautiful community. So, question and response sessions are named this way because I believe that I provide not the answer, not the single solution, not the single answer in these conversations, but simply a response to your questions. And you are your own best, I was going to say healer, so now I'm trying to find another word. You are the person who knows yourself best. You know your own truth. If something that I shared today doesn't land for you, it feels a little off, it feels a little like, I don't know about that. I'm not sure whether this will be appropriate for my body, my mind, my soul. I do invite you to take on any of the suggestions if you would like to try them, if you'd like to go in that direction with your own journey. And I want you to know that I'd like to empower you to really listen to your own body's wisdom. And there's nothing that I share here that is the key ingredient, the recipe, but as you'll see, I'll share some principles that are guiding principles on top of which certain strategies and tactics and tips live. And some of those strategies may be the perfect breakthrough strategies for you. Others may not be as relevant and may not move the needle as much as others do. So you get to try, you're going to have a lot more tools in your toolbox in order to experiment with everything that's available for you. But I do believe that the common principles, the really foundational pillars of what this journey is all about, are the core common truths of what it takes to overcome vaginismus and to claim your sexual liberation. So how does that land for you? I'm also going to check if we have anyone watching live with us in the Facebook group. So I'll check there for comments as well. But I imagine there are strategies and principles that you have tried before that had worked for a fellow vaginismus sister on some level that simply didn't sit quite right with you. And that is simply a piece of evidence that you're finding your own way. And here in this community, we do our best to invite you into finding that unique path that is actually right for you. So let's start with our first question, and you're absolutely welcome to ask follow-up questions as we go through this, especially if you're here in the Zoom room in the chat. I have my eye on that too. And we have 4 questions that you submitted today that I'm so excited to give my response to. The first one, and I feel like so many of us can relate, and this is definitely an odd, almost mysterious question that I'm so glad is asked because it lives in our head quite often without the bravery to put it out into the space, feeling like we're experiencing something odd, something weird. We might be the only person going through this, and what's wrong with my vagina, right? And there's nothing wrong with it at all. So why do I need to pee during sex is our question. And I assume this also means during penetrative sex in particular. And remember, there are so many forms of sex that we get to enjoy, even if penetrative sex is not quite yet on the menu, and it will be. So why do I need to pee during penetrative sex? So there's 2 reasons that this happens, and it is a very normal experience. And I remember feeling it as well, as I had a dilator in there. And then later I was also using a slightly more curved tool, which actually has a greater likelihood of creating this needing to pee sensation. The first reason from the 2 is that during dilating or during any penetrative sex, we may be stimulating and or pressing against what's called the G spot. And I invite you to think of this as the G area, because it is definitely not a single spot. It's also not a spot that is the same from body to body. And so it is a general area that is one of the erogenous zones that we can learn to enjoy as we transmute this needing to pee sensation into pleasure. So the G area is located closely in front of the urethra, and it is on the anterior wall of the vagina, which means up towards your belly. If you imagine yourself inserting something like a finger and you actually create this come hither motion, you would be stimulating that anterior or otherwise top wall of the vagina that is closer to the belly. And the G area sits very closely to the urethra, aka on the other side of the tissue that you're touching is the urethra, and some pressure or some pushing against it is going to create that needing to pee sensation. So that's one of the reasons that you might be feeling this. And it could really be quite uncomfortable. I remember feeling this intensity also, which leads to a sensation and a desire to tighten up our muscles again because we're resisting the need to pee. We might be worried, am I about to pee right now? And so that's very normal if you're experiencing that too. A little tip there is to have the conscious comfort of knowing that you already emptied your bladder just before that dilating session or just before that penetrative sex experience, and to actually gently explore that area, knowing that this is normal, and noticing how, as you stimulate that area, you may start to transmute some of that uncomfortable sensation of needing to pee into a bit of a craving and a pleasurable rising of arousal, which is actually the path to what are called G-spot orgasms. When I had my first G-spot orgasm, I wrote about it in the Love Diary blog. I had it using the crystal wand that was slightly more S-shaped. And I felt this rush of both almost anxiety that I'm about to pee myself, but also a reaching of climax that felt like the most intense orgasm I had had up until that point of time. And so I invite you to be experimenting with this kind of sensation, maybe also giving yourself another layer of comfort by putting down a towel or a sex blanket, for example, knowing that even if you do happen to make a mess with what can be a squirting orgasm, for example, which is something that can happen as part of the G-spot orgasm, that all is good and you can celebrate yourself for having surrendered to that kind of release and that kind of experience. It could be really a hallmark and a milestone of noticing and experiencing our pleasure potential to a whole new level. So this is the first reason that you may be noticing this need for pee. And the second one is actually that you may be stimulating a slightly deeper part of the vagina where the A spot lives. And so it's on the same anterior wall. It's just slightly deeper towards the cervix, and it's called the A spot. And on the other side of the A spot is where the bladder sits. So whether you're pushing or stimulating against the tissue beside the urethra or the tissue beside the bladder, especially as the blood flow there increases, that area gets engorged, the need to pee increases. So those are the two ways or reasons for which this happens. Now, the A spot doesn't have a very different kind of texture to it, but the G spot might be more so the one that you can almost find with more certainty because it feels soft and it feels more dimpled. So you might think of a piece of walnut, that kind of texture that the G spot feels like. And you'll be able to find and know where that is, especially if you're using your fingers, because that will help to really point it out for you. A tool won't be as good, of course, other than the sensation of this needing to pee, which is when you'll know you've got it. So I know this question does bring us into the pleasure aspect of it, and that may be completely out of your reality in terms of what you might expect around penetration based on what you've experienced. Please let me know if you can relate. I remember watching certain movie scenes or girlfriends who were talking about their sexual experiences back in the day when I wanted to leave the room every time that topic got started. And I remember being in complete disbelief that something that was so excruciatingly painful for me, and in fact impossible, and felt like a knife being warmed up by the fire and just inserted inside of my body in the most gentle area between the legs, my vulva, my vaginal opening. I just could not picture this being pleasurable. It was completely mind-blowing to me that people were wildly enjoying this kind of thing. And so I just want to bring us back into that reality. If it feels like this pleasure piece is somewhere out there, I can relate. I've been there, and I want you to know that it is possible for you, just like it became possible for me. And it's a beautiful experience. It's a beautiful experience of connection to ourselves. And of course, it takes for us to walk each small step in that direction until we can see the potential and the opportunity for it. We won't be able to see that just yet. And it requires for us to walk the path of our sexual liberation first, to take the first step and to be able to see 1 or 2 steps ahead of us, but not more than that. And if that's where you are right now, that is absolutely perfect. And I applaud you for taking it 1 step at a time. Okay. So our next question, I'm just going to open it up here. I get UTIs after any sexual activity. Should I look into hormone testing? And the answer to that question is multifaceted, because there are a variety of reasons for which you may be developing constant STIs or UTIs, sorry. I won't be able to speak to every single component of this. And my direct answer to whether you could look into hormone balancing and just testing to notice if your hormones are in balance would be a yes. It doesn't hurt to have that sort of information under our belts, to know how our hormones are looking and whether there is an imbalance there to be worked with, to be corrected. That wouldn't hurt whatsoever. And I've done hormone tests on multiple occasions in my life, not related to UTIs, but they were still really valuable in terms of the information I got them. But I do want to speak to another potential reason that these UTIs may be forming. And that is if the vaginal flora is not in its optimal state when it comes to 2 things. The first is pH, and the second is osmolality. I know, we haven't heard of this before, have we? Now, these 2 categories I've explored in a lot of detail when I wrote a blog post on whether our lubricants are quote unquote messing up our vagina. Because when we use products like lubricants or any other products internally within the vagina, which I don't recommend that you do, by the way, the vagina is a self-cleaning mechanism. It doesn't require any other products, but of course, lubricants are something that we use during sex, and absolutely celebrated to do that, even though a part of me back in the day felt like I'm a lesser woman if I need lubricant. Please throw that idea out the window, okay? So let's speak to how lubricants, being of a inappropriate pH or being either hyper or hypoosmotic, could actually be leading to an unfavorable shift in our vaginal environment, which then leads to STIs. So first with pH, a vaginal pH level that is healthy is between 3.8 and 4.6, where pH can range to up to about 5.5 without necessarily being unhealthy, but this is the general range we're looking at. So 3.8 to 4.6, potentially up to 5.5. If we use a lubricant with a pH below a normal vaginal pH, this will naturally reduce the acidity in the vagina. what happens then is that we damage the beneficial bacteria that fends off infections, therefore increasing the risk of infections. So we simply want to make sure that our lubricant or anything else, including our partner's penis, by the way, because this does also impact our vaginal flora's pH, we want to make sure that we are staying in between those ranges. And there are tests that we can do in order to test the pH of the vaginal flora. There are pH strips. I imagine there's other solutions out there, or potentially during a pelvic exam, if you are at the stage of being able to have one in a pain-free way, this could be something that you ask to be tested. So next up, osmolality. If a lubricant that we use, a product, is of higher osmolality than the cells of our body, which means that it is hyperosmotic, the vaginal tissue would release its own moisture in an attempt to reach homeostasis with the lubricant. So it's like salt, the lubricant, is absorbing water or absorbing the body's moisture, and we do not want this. On the other side of the spectrum, if a lubricant has a lower osmolality than the cells of the body, it would be called hypoosmotic, and this causes the cells of the body to pull water out of the lubricant. So a hypoosmotic lubricant would create an excess amount of moisture in the vagina. Essentially, a perfect lubricant would be right in the balance between these two, therefore called isoosmotic, meaning that its cells have the same hydration levels as the cells of the vaginal tissue, and there is no back and forth exchange of moisture happening, so that the vaginal tissue cells wouldn't release their own moisture or pull water out of the lubricant. I know that was a lot. I invite you to check out my blog post, How Your Lubricant May Be Messing Up Your Vagina, on the Love Diary blog on my website, which is katrinwithlove.com/love-diary. And there you can reference a list that I've included of lubricants that are either hyper or hypoosmotic or not an appropriate pH, and some of the lubricants that do fit in the appropriate ranges of both of these factors. One of those lubricants is Good Clean Love, and I've referenced them there because they are the closest that I have personally found so far in my research to being the best lubricant out there when it comes to these more scientific factors. Okay, this may be the thing that helps you reduce the occurrence of UTIs for you. And if that helps, I would absolutely love to hear that feedback so we can continue to share this information with anyone else who may benefit. Beautiful. Who's ready for our third question? Let's see on Facebook. Fantastic. E, L, or M, if you have any questions as we go forward, please drop them in the chat. So now we're getting into some of the very relevant vaginismus pieces of what the journey of overcoming this protected body response looks like. And so this question asks, please give me some tools to relax my vaginal muscles and retrain them. Also, how did you rewire your brain? And I love that this question asks on both the physical side as well as the psychological piece of what overcoming vaginismus looks like, because we know that it is not a one facet kind of thing. We really do need a holistic approach, emotionally, erotically, and physically. These are the three pillars that I speak about in the free masterclass that you have access to right inside this group, or if you haven't signed up for it, you're welcome to do that on my website, so I can grant you access and give you an email confirmation with your login details to get into our private members area where the 3 videos of this masterclass also live. And that's 6 hours of conversation and guidance dedicated to each one of these pillars. And still, I'd like to give you a summary of both of these components. So let's start with the easier question to answer. which is the tools to relax my vaginal muscles and to retrain them. Now, before we go into what I've called and categorized pelvic floor relaxation exercises, it's really important to note that the first step with this kind of journey, with infusing pelvic floor relaxation exercises into your routine, into creating them into habits, the first step to that is to do the necessary work with our nervous system to help us downregulate our nervous system, to activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for our rest and digest functions, in order to actually come out of the survival mechanism that a lot of us are living in, which is also the nature of vaginismus itself, which is the freeze response. This is our survival mechanism. This is the default response that a lot of our nervous systems are quote unquote stuck in, between fight, freeze, fawn, and fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, all the F's. So vaginismus is a freeze response. If we don't spend the time to help downregulate our nervous systems and access a state of rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system being activated, anything that we do, any amount of appointments to have the help of a pelvic floor physical therapist to be working with us or on our body are going to be either completely ineffective or minimally effective. Why? Because our body is still in this protective response. It is still putting up this protective mechanism, and not only through the tightening of the pelvic floor muscles, but on a nervous system level, is not allowing our body to feel safe enough to open, safe enough to relax, safe enough to access a state of nourishment. And no amount of deep breathing is going to help us actually move through and create the benefit that a nervous system reset would. So a nervous system reset is absolutely necessary. And it is usually on our second call together in our one-on-one work when I support fellow Vaginismus sisters who choose this form of private mentorship. It's on our second call that we dive into this kind of work, because without it, we may be doing a whole lot ineffectively. So a nervous system reset, the question is how? And I'm going to open book. I'm going to share absolutely every single piece of the how that I have come to and all of the techniques that we use to create this benefit for ourselves. And you are absolutely welcome to Google this, try this on your own. And of course, I'm here if you would like some more personalized guidance with it. The how to a nervous system reset involves a few different techniques and modalities. Polyvagal theory is very relevant here. It's helping the vagus nerve function as it is intended to. That is one access point. And deep breathing, certain different modalities that are accessing a nervous system reset using this theory can be really helpful. However, I want to focus on something that I discovered over 2 years ago that was just a must. And I speak about it all the time. You've probably heard me mention tension and trauma releasing exercises. When I discovered these exercises, the first time I did them myself, I had an emotional release like I hadn't had before. And I experienced a surrender to my body that actually felt a little bit overwhelming because I was doing it solo and it was a little bit scary to go into that kind of release physically and emotionally by myself, but it was still my path. And so after that session, I decided I need to get trained into facilitating this for other people. And that's what I did. And that's why I now infuse it into this journey of our sexual liberation. So what are tension and trauma releasing exercises? They're called TRE for short. They're a process of helping us release the daily stresses of life that are literally stored in our muscles as well as in our fascia, but also to downregulate our nervous system and process emotional pent-up energy that is also held in the body. We do this through activating the central nervous system and activating what are called neurogenic muscle tremors. So yes, tremors, a gentle shaking, tremoring in the body. And we actually start activating this in the legs after a series of exercises that are designed to gently fatigue and stretch the muscles and invite them to let go of their tension holding patterns so that this tremoring mechanism can activate, and we can symbolically almost have this sigh of relief of our body releasing a lot of the stress hormones and pent-up energy stored first in our legs where the tremors start, and then moving into our hips, into our core, the whole front line of the body. Also our neck, our jaw muscles can get involved, our feet, our arms, the whole thing. Usually on our first session, the goal is for you to experience the tremors and to have that release happen in a way that is enjoyable, so you want to do it again. And it is with the evolution of the practice that we start to get other parts of the body involved. Now, TRE really helps us also practice surrendering to the wisdom of the body, which is huge because overcoming vaginismus in itself is a process of finding safety and surrender. And TRE helps us create the mind-to-body connection that we are looking for as the foundation that will pull us going forward as we layer on all of these other strategies and techniques over top of this nervous system reset. So that's what I wanted to say about TRE, and I emphasize how important it is that you find a nervous system reset kind of practice before anything else, okay? So E says, Katrin, would it be possible to have vaginismus, vulvodynia, and PCOS? Yes, it is possible, absolutely. We see this quite often. The good news there is that though some of the treatment specifically between vulvodynia and PCOS versus vaginismus is different, a lot of the components of the emotional processing, the nervous system reset that are required do help all three of these quote unquote labels that we take on as to how our body has decided to react as a result of all of the big T or small t trauma that we may have experienced in our life. And so as we do a lot of the emotional processing in the direction of overcoming one protective body response or one physical manifestation, we are actually making progress with all three. Now, there are important components to consider hormonally, specifically for vulvodynia and PCOS, as well. Eating habits are very important. And I want to let you know that I'm not by any means a specialist in these two areas. So I would be encouraging you and inviting you to speak to other people who have experienced both of these, as well as medical professionals who specialize and really understand this, hopefully have also experienced it within their own bodies, because that's always a really great way to know that that person is aligned with personal experience to be able to support you best. So that would be my response to that. My sex therapist talks strongly about emotional support too. She's helping me get in tune with my body and sometimes uses craniosacral therapy and myofascial release. Amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. And I'm so glad that you are arming yourself with a team, with a tribe to support you in all of these different areas. And emotional processing is really the core. When the nervous system reset is in place, the very next step we start to take is infusing pelvic floor relaxation exercises to start to gather momentum in the physical aspects of the journey. But then we layer on emotional processing as the next big chunk before we move on to the erotic and pleasure pieces. So we've got to do nervous system, pelvic floor relaxation exercises with emotional processing at the same time. and moving forward then with adding the erotic components before we ever touch a dilator. And I remember doing it the other way around. I meet fellow Vaginismus sisters almost on a daily basis that are told to do it the other way around. But I'm a massive believer that we've got to approach this emotionally and psychologically first. So the fawn response is not necessarily part of polyvagal theory, but it is one of the sections of freeze that is slightly more nuanced. It's almost like play dead in a way, not necessarily having to do with polyvagal theory. You're very welcome, So let's move on with what else will respond to this question. So we have the most complete response possible. And I have also spoken to some of these components in other question and response sessions. You can find the recordings of those within the guide section of our group. And each one has a list of the questions that were asked. So you can literally scan through, notice which questions you're most interested in, and know which video to watch, therefore. And that will be our growing library of guidance with questions and my responses. So yes, we talked about TRE, and then the chunk of pelvic floor relaxation exercises is made up of the following. First, we need to learn how to breathe in the way that we used to breathe as children, and that is belly breaths, or else called diaphragmatic breathing. We, unfortunately, in the way that we are raised, the way that our society works, end up breathing more so in the chest and using our lungs to a much lower capacity than they actually have. And what this ends up doing is we don't have the expansion and gentle contraction movement of our belly. But if you look at children walking around in the world, doing their thing, playing their games, just like my niece and nephew, you're going to see them with a big belly, fully breathing, utilizing their entire body as it is meant to. That is something that gets lost with time. And so although it sounds simple, we do need to go back to those basics. On the inhale, gently expanding our belly out, and on the exhale, letting it fall down. And it may feel very unnatural at first. It did feel very unnatural to me, but it is absolutely necessary with, again, laying that next foundation on top of the pelvic floor relaxation exercises that follow. Belly breaths in themselves, with the diaphragm that gently contracts and expands, actually create the internal pressure to move our pelvic floor muscles, the pelvic bowl, along with the breath. So on the inhale, as we actually inhale, the diaphragm moves down, it gently presses down on the pelvic floor muscles, and this creates a pushing down sensation or a gentle stretch in the direction of relaxation. So on the inhale, the belly goes out, and we're gently pushing our pelvic floor muscles down to relax them. On the opposite movement, the belly falls down, the diaphragm moves up, and the pelvic floor gently contracts. So in the normal breathing pattern of belly breathing, we are already starting to create a range of motion of the pelvic floor muscles that is more complete, and it is more so the natural way that the body is intended to function. So already, without consciously using our pelvic floor muscles, we are accessing a level of benefit there just because the body works in this way. But of course, we go further. So on top of belly breathing, you then want to incorporate a reverse Kegel exercise. This is not standard Kegels. It is one that is the reverse of that and is intended more so for relaxation. Standard Kegels are intended for strengthening and toning. And so a lot of common pelvic floor related exercises or marketing for incontinence out there is going to say, if you have a challenge with your pelvic floor, do these Kegels. We don't want to be doing that. We want to be doing the opposite thing. And I speak with women Also, on a pretty regular basis, I'd say about once a month, I'd say, I was told to do Kegels. And so I've been doing Kegels, but it seems like things are getting worse. What is going on here? That's the reason. When we have an overactive state of our pelvic floor muscles, Kegels are going to exacerbate that overactive state and are going to make things worse. So we want to go the other way. Okay. So after your reverse Kegels, we can also include a stretching routine specifically designed for pelvic floor relaxation. I recorded a video on this along with all the other components inside of the pelvic floor relaxation exercises course that I have. And stretching is huge. Again, sounds simple, but it's really helpful. There is also foam rolling practice for self-massage. You can use a foam roller. You can also use foam balls to help with external trigger point release, especially in the quads, especially in the glutes. That could be a big breakthrough for you. Keep in mind, if you also sit cross-legged pretty often on a chair during work or wherever else, that may be one reason that you're experiencing more tension in one side of the pelvic floor than another. And therefore also might feel that your glutes are tight mostly on the right side and not the left. Trigger point release using this foam ball, as well as self-massage, as well as partnered massage that I have a video on. These are going to be really supportive with releasing some of those tension holding patterns so that then the pelvic floor muscles don't have to be working harder and there can be more spaciousness to find balance there with the relaxation. They won't be getting pulled in one way or another because the glutes are now relaxed, because the quads, the hamstrings are now relaxed. Another component of this is a hip tension release practice. This is a beautiful practice that comes from the Tibetan tradition, actually, and it was shown by my herbologist that I work with, and there's a video on that as well. And finally, in pelvic floor relaxation exercises, there's some meditations which are beautiful for the mind-to-body connection for pelvic floor release. But another thing to look out for is jaw relaxation exercises. We hold a lot of tension in our jaw, and the jaw and the pelvis are very much connected. We also want to be consciously aware of the tension we're holding in our body in general, the tension we're holding in our jaw, and especially during, well, really not especially, but both in our everyday life, as well as during a penetrative practice, to be consciously aware of what our jaw is doing. A lot of us grind our teeth and clench our teeth and our jaw. And if that's you, that might be a really beautiful place to start. And there's a lot of physiological similarities between how the vocal cords and the jaw, as well as how the pelvic floor muscles actually function. And in baby development of these areas, they actually kind of start off as being the same structure and then separate out. And that's pretty cool. That's why as well they are similar. So that was a bit of a tangent, but that completes kind of the pelvic floor relaxation component, how to relax my vaginal muscles. It is only then that we can move into the erotic components necessary to retrain our vaginal muscles as well, to feeling safe and open, to being able to surrender and experience pleasure, both in a solo kind of way and in a partnered sexual dynamic, which of course brings on layers of this that are extra complex, because we may have had experiences in life that caused vulnerability in general to be a source of pain. Opening to another human, trusting another human being more difficult. And we have been hurt before. We have put protection layers over our hearts, just like we have over our yonis. And yoni is just another word in Sanskrit for womb. So over our vulvas and our vaginas. And she has been hurt just like your heart has been hurt. And the erotic components, aside from some of the processing around relationships, also do focus on finding and embracing our authentic eroticism, how we express ourselves as erotic beings and what our unique flavor with that is. Because just as we have different love languages and how we receive romantic love, We have different erotic languages with how our nervous system is wired to feel safe in a pleasurable experience, to feel safe enough to be curious and therefore to experience sexual arousal. And if you are trying to play in a different realm of an erotic dictionary, an erotic language in the way that your body expresses that, because that's what you've seen in the media, then you may be experiencing more of that closing because we're not being true to our authentic design of our erotic expression. So that's a whole other pillar that does have a lot to do with relaxing our vaginal muscles. And when we start to play in our authentic eroticism, we access a level of turn on as well as a level of physical relaxation that we may have never experienced before, even if we've done all the reverse Kegels just right. Okay, so that's important to consider. Yeah, you said my cousin calls it yoni as well. Cool. I like that word. I like all the words, but I definitely had a lot of resistance to vagina in the past, also to vulva. I had a lot of resistance to looking at my vulva, to touching her. I had a sense of disgust around the moisture that was there. And all of those components had me register an icky feeling towards my body, a sense of disgust, a sense of, how is this sexy for you when thinking about my partner's experience of my body? And all of that created the sense of disbelief that my body is lovable, that my body is sexy, that my body deserves pleasure. And there is a big layer of rewiring that needs to happen there in order for us to be in relationship with her in the way that she feels heard. That she, our vulva, our vagina, feels heard and loved and wants to open, because she now wants to be in relationship with us and doesn't feel like she needs to protect herself from us. As odd as that sounds, that is part of what she is doing. She needs to know that she can trust us again and that she's loved by us. So it's only with that foundation of the emotional and the pelvic floor relaxation, as well as the erotic components, that we can move to other more deep, no pun intended, aspects of relaxing our pelvic floor, which is a pleasurable penetrative practice using dilators or other penetrative tools, our fingers, our bodies, our partner's bodies, if we're at that stage. And a caveat in this that is a whole other category is internal trigger point release, also called vaginal de-armoring. And it was Z in our group just recently, I think just yesterday, that shared her beautiful experience of starting to incorporate a vaginal de-armoring practice. And she experienced an emotional and physical release with it. And so this internal gentle massage can also be an amazing way to open up that bottleneck of relaxation that seems to be kind of on the other side of something. And what I mean by that is it's a breakthrough kind of practice for a lot of us, especially if you find yourself being stuck on a particular dilator. Vaginal de-armoring, also called trigger point release, is one amazing way to move through that perceived sense of stuckness, and very real sense of stuckness, of course, but just one that doesn't last forever. So it's possible to move through that with this practice and with all the other pieces that I've mentioned. So now to the harder part of this particular question about rewiring our brain. A lot of the components that I have mentioned already, although they may seem largely physical, do have a benefit when it comes to the mind-to-body connection, which is one of the ways to rewire our brain. So please see both of these responses as being applicable to the rewiring of the brain piece. What I also do want to say on here, though, is that our subconscious mind is responsible for 95% of our behavior. And vaginismus as a protective body response has a lot to do with the subconscious mind. This is why we may be laying in bed with a partner that we love and we trust, or solo if we're not partnered. And we want the experience, we are excited about it, we want to have penetrative sex and feel super sexually aroused, right? And so although consciously everything lines up, on a subconscious level, we are living into, I must protect myself. This is dangerous, or I'm not supposed to be doing this, or this is a source of shame, and therefore I need to shut down, I need to close. It is because of this nature of how our minds work and really how our bodies work, because I believe through a lot of Bruce Lipton's work, actually, that our subconscious mind lives in every cell of our body. And so it is the body-based work, the somatic work, that is actually the one that taps into the subconscious mind. It is how each cell of our body is programmed to perceive the world, which is what our subconscious beliefs are. So through practices that tap into the programming that already exists on a subconscious level, which was created up until about the age of 10 or 11, we really gathered everything about what we believe the world to be about, how to behave in certain situations, what is good or bad. All of those programs really registered for us up until that age. We need to tap into, through subconscious related practices, into that programming in order to shift it on a deep level. And another way to think of that is that we need to do the emotional processing of things that got imprinted on us subconsciously and in the body. And we need to do the emotional processing to close the trauma loop on those experiences. And that could have been big T trauma, right? That could have been small t trauma, something that registered as less than nourishing. And it is by going back to some of those memories from a place, a nourished place, a resource place to be able to process those emotions, and through doing the somatic work, that we are rewiring the brain. TRE is part of the somatic category. Any sort of movement practice is part of that somatic category. Getting back into communication with the body, being able to understand its yeses and nos based on its physical sensations, which is the way that the body communicates, all of that is part of the work when it comes to rewiring the so-called brain. It has a lot to do with the body rather than this piece of organ that we have up in our head. And really, the practice of overcoming vaginismus is moving through the path of going from valuing logic, valuing analysis, valuing knowledge as the thing that makes us valuable in the world, which was the way that I tried to feel loved by my parents back in the day, really to moving to embodiment in the body, seeing expression, seeing emotional expression and being in our truth, not only in here, but also in here. That is the journey that we have to walk. And hence it's coming back home to our bodies. That is a really big part of this work. So that is all I wanted to say for that question. And E asks, is there a word for the male part? I had a hard time using the word penis, and I'm still sometimes hesitant to look or touch my husband there. How do I get over that hesitancy of his member and the bodily fluids involved in sex? Amazing question, E. I want you to know I relate to this 1000%. I also had the resistance of looking as well as interacting with my partner's penis. Another word for it is the lingam, L-I-N-G-A-M. This is also from the more tantric focused sexuality studies, just like yoni is. I believe lingam is a Sanskrit word, just like yoni is. And so if lingam feels better for you, that might be a really beautiful way to refer to your partner's body. And potentially to build the bridge to also getting more comfortable with other words if you want to be comfortable with other words at any point. And if you don't, lingam might be the one.
how do we get more comfortable? Now, I just want this to really sink in that you're not alone with feeling a resistance to your husband's body. And it is about 80% of Vaginismus sisters that I speak to that have this very same concern. That's why I created another blog post. I'm telling you about all the blog posts today, which is called Getting Comfortable with Your Partner's Penis. I think that's what it is, on the Love Diary blog. And there's a picture of jeans and a banana coming out of the jeans, if you want to find it visually. In there, there's a practice that we can use as one of the practices to start to get more comfortable. Essentially, what I want to speak to here are first some of the deeper layers as to why we might be uncomfortable with our partner's penis. And this actually may also have an impact on our dilating practice, because when we get to one of the final dilator sizes and we're now to transition to penetrative sex with a partner or PIV sex, it is the shape of the penis that is one of the reasons that we have this subconscious resistance to allowing it inside. Both from a physical perspective, because the head of the penis is a different shape than the dilators that we're already used to. So that, of course, creates this additional layer of, well, can I invite this in my body? It feels a little bit too wide. Maybe I can't do this, right? So those are the concerns that we move through with the physical realms of the penis shape. But psychologically, unfortunately, in our society, because of a lot of the abuse that happens in the world when it comes to, trigger warning here, I'm about to mention the R word, when it comes to sexual trauma and sexual abuse and rape. Okay, I'm done with that. We have registered the symbology of that part of a male's body to be a weapon, a source of danger, a source of pain. Also, we register it to be a source of pregnancy, to get pregnant. And the fear of pregnancy is another reason we may feel this closing come up once again, when this concept of, I may be putting myself at risk of conceiving with my partner. And even though the solo dilating practice has gone beautifully, oh, the brick wall is up again. Well, the fear of pregnancy is one of the big reasons that the brick wall might come up again when we introduce our partner's body into the mix. So those are kind of some of the deeper layers. There might be emotional processing that needs to be done around the penis shape physically, as well as what the penis represents for you, as well as what the bodily fluids, how the bodily fluids impact you. Because just like I had an ick around my vaginal discharge, I also had an ick around sperm, semen, and the sperm that lives within it. And so there is absolutely no need for you to be completely comfortable and celebratory of sperm and semen. You can absolutely overcome vaginismus without feeling 100% comfortable with that or wanting to interact with this part of our human experience in all the ways. So I just want to mention, overcoming vaginismus doesn't require that component. But if you did want to have that tactile relationship that feels really comfortable, that is also possible with practice and with time and with a lot of the emotional processing that's involved. So inside of that blog post, I actually have a step-by-step practice that you can do alongside your husband, your partner, to start to get comfortable with that part of his body. Okay, and I'll just leave it at that for now. If you have any other question around that, I would be happy to respond in more detail. So now we are moving on to our final question. This question was asked by one of our Vaginismus sisters over email, and I actually responded to her over email. And I would love to read this to you as a form of a love letter that you can listen to in this moment from also the recognition of this other woman's concern. And I just like the way I wrote it. And so I want to deliver it exactly in that most powerful way. So the question is, how did you figure out what to do to heal / overcome this? It's difficult to continue trying different things and knowing what will or won't help. And I can feel the frustration in that question. I remember the frustration that I had gone through. And so I think this is just such a beautiful, vulnerable share around how do you figure it out and how do you keep trying when you've already tried so many different things. So if it feels right to you in this moment to close your eyes and to let these words penetrate you in a really touching, connecting kind of way, you're welcome to do that. And I will read you what I said to her. This question is such a beautiful one. I feel that it's representative of a journey that so many fellow Vaginismus sisters are on. How do we upkeep the sense of hope and resilience that's required to keep trying new things when so many haven't worked before? How do we really know what to do to overcome this? I wish I had a clear-cut set of instructions for you to really respond to this question of how. I wish there was a set of criteria that we could just measure against to be able to validate or invalidate a new practice or a type of therapy or a technique before we tried it. That would have already saved us all countless hours of attempts that didn't move the needle, hopes that transformed into disappointments, and tears that were shed. I personally found my way through many dead ends and detours, and part of that struggle is what makes me so passionate to provide a more easeful path with this for you from here on out. Unfortunately, though, there isn't a way to really tell with a high level of precision which strategy is a good one and which isn't. As well, there isn't even a set of strategies that are consistently effective for everyone. And therefore, the journey that we all are asked to walk is one of continuing to try new keys to a lock that hasn't yet budged. New keys symbolic of new things to try. And that's just the bitter truth that a lot of this is trial and error. However, there's something else that will hopefully invite a sigh of relief for you. Though there isn't a way to know which strategies work for you yet, I have seen time and time again that there are a handful of principles on which strategies are based that are true in what the sexual liberation journey, overcoming vaginismus, requires. These principles are the common threads in the journey of all women that I've supported and have guided themselves to their intimacy goals. And under each principle, I can point out and offer a tool belt of strategies and techniques from which to choose to help bring the wisdom of the principle into a practical and tangible benefit in your life. The principles have to do with this being a journey of self-love, of finding safety in vulnerability, in surrender, of healing a heart that has closed for a variety of reasons in protection, of emotional processing and expression so we can release the emotions that have been suppressed and carried in our bodies over our lives, of erotic exploration that is authentic to how your nervous system is wired, of down-regulating your nervous system in the first place in order to create a fresh slate from which any growth can happen. So we come out of the survival mode of freeze. And based on these principles then, there are 3 pillars that I've landed on: emotional processing, finding and embracing our authentic sexual selves, and finally, the physical aspects of finding safety and penetration. Then within each of these buckets, there are more than a handful of strategies, practices, tips, and tricks. In a way, finding our footing with this has included trial and error for all of us. And still, I like to think that I've done a large portion of it so that I could have the honor of giving you the gift of saving time on that wild goose chase. So you can get a bit of a roadmap and avoid the many dead ends and quote unquote mistakes that I made and Vaginismus Sisters have before you did. And I absolutely love that my suffering helps to avoid even if just a little bit of yours. So my invitation is for you to keep the visual of that lock and keys in mind. Lean on making decisions on the next steps based on the principles behind the strategies, and take advantage of any of the roadmap that I've put together or other Vaginismus sisters have for themselves. That may mean studying and applying insights from the free resources you have, creating a conversation with a fellow Vaginismus sister from our community, diving into participating in a group experience that I might have available for you as soon as my website is live, and any other resource or direction that feels right for you in your system. As well, I commend you for asking this beautiful question, and this means that you're already doing exactly what I mentioned above, which is being an active participant in the journey, starting this conversation and opening yourself up to being supported. And I applaud you for that. And that is the love letter that I sent to her and I'm sending to you today. I applaud you for being here, for listening, for learning, for processing all of this information and taking what lands, and most importantly, applying just one thing from today to put it into practice. Now, the final piece that comes to mind here is that sometimes we don't allow ourselves to really dive in and really try from the fact that having the hope before and it leading to disappointment has been heartbreaking. And that's part of the reason we tread carefully, right? We kind of walk a little bit more carefully through some of what we hear. And that's amazing. Going slow is the path to safety and to nourishment, which is what this journey is all about. And I just want to make sure that disappointment or the perceived expected disappointment is not keeping you small. It is not holding you back. And I get that it has hurt before. Things have not worked before. So why would this next thing work? Why even try? Well, what I actually heard from one of my mentors just today in a video that I was listening to is that trying to avoid disappointment will create a disappointing life. Trying to avoid disappointment will create a disappointing life. And you either deal with the fear of the disappointment or you deal with a life less than it could have been. You get to decide. And I think that's a really empowering component of life to remember, to take away with us, is that we've got to take the leaps of faith. And I believe that every single step that we do take is a leap of faith. It's a micro leap of faith. And some of them are much bigger, like when I tried to transition to PIV sex, feeling like, of course, this is not going to work. This has not worked before. I have no idea if I'm completely ready, but I feel like logically I am. Something tells me intuitively that this might happen, but I don't know for sure. And when it did, and when I looked down between my legs and my partner at the time was inside of me, and I actually did not feel the excruciating, burning, sharp pain that I had before, and I was in complete disbelief that this was even happening, that was me landing on the other side of that leap of faith. But I could not have landed there unless I leaped. You don't know what 5 steps ahead looks like until you take the first one and maybe the second one. So a lot of this journey asks us to trust the mystery of it, as hard as that is, and to find safety in the unknown, which again is what having penetrative sex, surrendering to another human being, allowing another person inside of us, which is the most vulnerable thing that we can do. It really is finding safety and comfort in the unknown. And I feel that if there was a hierarchy in all of our life lessons, finding safety in the unknown is up here. So we have been dealt cards that are really testing the depths of our willpower, the depths of our trust, and our resilience, and the beauty that we are. We are tested. And it really sucks that we're tested. And I guess every single human gets tested in unique ways, and this just happened to be ours. But it is with each leap of faith that you get to see and look back and celebrate yourself for all of the progress that you've made and all of the ways that you have come to be closer to yourself. You have come home to yourself. You've come home to your body. And that's my wish for you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for asking your beautiful questions. I think you're doing amazingly. And I wish that someone told me that more and more and more and more at every stage that I was in the 6 years that it took me to have pain-free penetrative sex, but then another couple to what I would say would be to have claimed a large component of my sexual liberation, because it did not happen the moment I was having pain-free penetrative sex. I had not dove into a lot of the erotic components that I've now pulled into the journey as pillar number 2. And I don't believe sexual liberation is ever really completely ended, completely finished. It's a long-term life kind of journey. But being able to enjoy all forms of sex without limitation, being able to feel connected to our partner in ways that we had always wished for, and to be connected to our body in ways that we craved, I feel like that is a really beautiful component of sexual liberation that you get to access by continuing to walk on this path. You're very welcome, E. Thank you so much for being here. I invite you to celebrate yourself. I invite you to reflect on something that you're celebrating about yourself today. This is a tradition at the end of all of our calls that I'd like to bring into our question and response sessions. And intentionally celebrate yourself in a way that feels really nourishing. We really don't do that enough. We really don't. And we've got to celebrate all of the little wins and see them as big wins to keep us inspired and motivated to keep walking forward. So I wish you an incredible day. Please comment on the recording if you watched with one takeaway from this experience, one thing you are planning to put into practice, so we can create a little collection of action steps or insights and nuggets of wisdom that felt most powerful to you. And let's continue supporting each other through the sexual liberation. Okay, bye everyone.